But y'all, the first science news story that I thought is a game changer actually has to do with HIV. And you might be like, Balint, I haven't heard an HIV update in a while. Haven't either, to be totally honest with y'all. It seemed kind of like a lot of the breakthroughs had really slowed down the past couple of years in terms of HIV treatment. However, this year brought about a very, very, very exciting new study. The study actually was entitled The Long Shot. And the quick blurb, an injectable HIV drug with a novel mechanism that shows a remarkable ability to prevent infection. So let me bring y'all up to speed on what is this. Let's see. Ella's wondering, we will be reviewing stories we've heard, new to us, or a combo of both. Combo of both, Ella. Combo of both. Primarily because I actually don't think that this HIV story we ever had on the radar. And I looked back at some of the dates, and there's not yet an official paper on it because it's actually a phase 3 clinical trial that has been put out as like, here is data on this brand new drug. And it's being done at Yale University School of Medicine with the pharmacology department. And it is a new kind of drug meant to prevent the initial infection of HIV. So what this is, it's a prophylactic. So it is in anticipation of you getting HIV. You take this drug, and the idea is you will then not maybe get HIV. So they were very cautious, Ella, in not calling it a vaccine, primarily because you're not dosing a patient with live or inactive virus, which is usually what the definition is of a vaccine, or I guess with the new COVID vaccines where it's an mRNA structure. You are not dosing anything from the virus itself into the patient, but rather a very particular drug that acts on one part of the virus to inactivate it. So it's a different mechanism, but you can think of it in terms of like, we go on like the thought exercise of what exactly the goal of it is, then it is in fact the goal of it would be some flavor of a vaccine, but it's just a very different mechanism of it. Could this be used in a mom to prevent fetus from getting HIV? Great question, Tuba. So Tuba, the goal of this study and what they were looking at was just at the patient itself, themselves, so the person, not any kind of pregnancy. So there was not any kind of looking at what happens to a potential baby. The drug is called lenacapavir. Lenacapavir. It is what is called a first-in-class drug. First-in-class drugs are really, really cool because it means the mechanism by which they're acting has never been used before for that kind of treatment, if that makes sense. So what the drug is doing has never been used before to try to fight and treat HIV. So the HIV molecule, the virus, is what's called a capsid. And the capsid is the structure that houses the genetic material. So inside of the capsid is the genetic material that it reproduces with. And that's what the virus uses to make more and more copies of himself. By messing up the capsid, it prevents the virus from replicating. Chat, I want y'all to guess. They had two study groups, control and then this drug treated. How many patients that got treated with this drug ended up getting HIV? Like, how efficacious was it? How good was this drug? So out of 0 to 100%, how many patients got HIV that were using the drug compared to those that did not use the drug? 0%. No patients got HIV that were taking this drug. Now, here's the cool thing. So, Andrea, if it is a daily pill, it is not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work is because you have to depend on people to take their pills every day. So it's not a pill for that reason. Another really cool part of this drug is that it is injected, but it is not having to be a special kind of like subcutaneous injection. So this one is not intramuscular, but rather subcutaneous, so just under the skin. Intramuscular injections are harder to do in hard to reach locations. The population that they're using is, in particular, they're focusing in on populations in Africa. So they had 2 groups in Africa that were of high likelihood to be exposed to HIV. And then, Andrea, they do this injection twice a year, which I think is also remarkable. So it turns out why this drug is actually good is the reason why a lot of people thought that it was not going to work. The reason with that is it's what is called very hydrophobic. So it does not want to dissolve in liquid very well. You remember the oil droplets, Andrea, that we saw with the venom yesterday? That's what you started seeing with this drug. Droplets of venom. But instead of venom, right, it's the drug. It turns out that that's actually the absolute best thing that the drug could have, because it made it so it lasts longer. So it stays in your system for a long time. And because it's staying in your system for a long time, you don't have to inject as often, right? So in looking for a drug that makes a difference to populations in the world, what you want, easy delivery, right? Ideally pills, but they found that that's not going to work. So the next thing is injection, but you need to have it be quick, like boop and gone if you're going to inject, and not often. If it's done often, no one is going to come use it. So what's really, really cool is they had 4 different patient groups classified as either men, trans women, trans men, and gender non-binary people. And these were all people who were to be having unprotected sex with men, was the direction that it was meant to go in. And so they sampled 3,200 people total, and the ratio was 2-to-1. So 2,200 people got the drug, and I guess 1,100 people did not get the drug. They received the oral option that is currently on the market, the best possible care. And so then they do a comparison and contrast, and they found that 0% had the virus. Now, the way that they measure viral amount spikes is it's a blood test, and they measure to see how much viral load is in your blood. And so if it's below a threshold of detection, then you are considered as HIV negative. And so that is what was happening when these patients were tested, is again that they were identified as HIV negative, all 2,200 of them. Come to the hospital twice to give you these injections, and then we just need to measure and see what happens. Like, they're not telling them they're not saying change anything about your lifestyle. They're just saying, is it going to be protective or not? Which I think is really interesting. You could still have it in 0 viral. You could. Although Smikes, I believe 0 viral load still classifies you, at least on like the insurance front, as not having HIV. That becomes a mixed bag of like different types of terminology, unfortunately. But it could maybe when you have actually a 0 viral load, you don't spread it. So there are patients that have below threshold of detection, that is the threshold at which you cannot pass it on to another human. But still it's something very important to keep an eye on. Let's see. So what is the control viral load with the oral meds? Like, so how many Saphira's Mama patients got the infection that were taking the oral medication? So the oral medication they said it's 89% more effective than the oral medication. So it is, let's see, I think if you broke it down, it's like something like the mathematicallys in that, I think it ended up being something like 40% efficacious. Yes, so that is Saphira's Mama. The pills have been given to patients in Africa, and then the injections are also given to, I believe, the same patient population. The issue is that it's still expensive. It's about $42,000 per patient per year. So it's not really accessible yet. That's always like the really, really hard part of these kinds of drugs, is to make the price come down. Actually, one of the other medical breakthroughs we're going to be talking about tonight is a treatment for sickle cell using CRISPR. And that is on the order of like millions per patient per year. So with respect to that, it's a smidge better, but it's still a very hefty price tag. I think Reiko mentioned it well, is that there just hasn't been a lot of breakthrough cases in any kind of drug in terms of AIDS treatment for a while now, several years. And Reiko mentioned part of it was there were some controversial studies that unfortunately did not pan out and had to be retracted. So keeping that in mind. Yes, the price does have all of the R&D that goes into not just building that drug, but also all of the R&D that went into building the 10 other drugs that failed. That's what drives up the price. I bet if I were a gambling man, that they are doing mouse studies on that currently, but in order to put it into humans, it has to go through the different phases of clinical testing again. However, if you get through and you have this drug approved at phase 3, you can skip phase 1 and possibly even phase 2, depending on the drug, and just go straight to phase 3 clinical testing for those that already would have the drug. Phase 1 clinical testing is just taking healthy individuals and giving them a high dose of a drug and seeing what happens. And you're just measuring, like, is it safe for human consumption, or, blood levels and whatnot. So you could use said data if everything's like already approved in that large package deal. My guess is, again, they're probably doing something with mice and just seeing like in a mouse model, what is the infection state already? Like if you infect the mouse with HIV, it has AIDS-like symptoms, and then you give it the drug. If it changes the viral level, be a really cool thing to test. But there was no commentary in the release about what happens if you do that level of infection there. Good question. So that is the capsid that's surrounding the genetic material of the virus. That capsid is what gets interfered with when the drug is injected. So that's what the drug is targeting, so that the virus capsule can't actually fuse with any of the target cells, and then it can't reproduce, and then you end up. I'm actually not sure, Smikes, if then the virus is just gone, like eventually just dies out of the system because it can't bind to any of its targets and it can't replicate. Remember, we talked about what that meant, y'all, at the start of this news story. What does it mean to be in a new class? All that is referring to is that the drug is acting in a way on the virus itself that hasn't been observed or characterized before. It is a brand new way of fighting the virus. So pills are great, y'all, like especially if it works, but the likelihood of people remembering to take it every day, that's the limiting factor. And it's not just for something like this, it's something that anything that you have to take daily. So like for me, I have a daily allergy pill. If I miss my daily allergy pill, I am nerfed for the next day. Or yeah, oral birth control. Or I'm also on a statin. So like the alvarostatin is what it's called, which is for high cholesterol. And that's meant to be daily too. And one part of those drugs is because the half-life of how long it stays in the drug, like in your system, is why you might have to take it daily. But the beauty of this injectable drug is that it stays in the system for 6 months. And that's why you only have to do 2 injections a year. So the likelihood that you can get someone in for a quick, easy injection twice a year is better than having them take a drug daily. And right, there's drugs that do this, it's the same limiting factor with a bunch of drugs you have to take all the time, right? So it is not the problem he's describing here, and by problem I mean like the difficulty in administration is applied to a bunch of different drugs too, not just to this one. And that, y'all, is that really exciting first science news story. I hope y'all found it as cool as I did. Especially the preventative measure, the fact of how efficacious it was, so how likely it was to be successful was again 100%. And then the mechanism of action. Yeah, so it's super, super promising. It's in phase 3 clinical trials, so you never know what's going to happen. But I think he really nicely summed it up that we have been kind of on a overload in terms of pandemics. And I think he really nicely summed it up where it's like, oh yeah, we've kind of forgotten about AIDS because COVID was the top of mind. And there's still a bunch of other things in the world that are killing people. And luckily not everyone's forgotten, right? And then this drug seems like it could very well be something that comes in and helps a lot of people and hopefully helps in the eradication of AIDS. It'd be incredible. So again, the one other thing I wanted to highlight was the mechanism of action. So how this is able to work is that it interferes with the capsule, the structure itself of the AIDS virus. In people who are resistant to AIDS, they are resistant because they have receptors on their cells that do not get recognized by the AIDS virus capsule receptors. The way that the AIDS virus binds and gets into our cells, if we don't have that resistance mutation, is because there's a signal in our cell and there's a signal on the outside of the capsid, and they bind, and then the capsid's like bloop, and it comes into our cells. If your receptor is mutated, so like you look like this instead of this, all right, bad example, I don't know, they just can't bind, right? That's what prevents the entry into the cell. So this is working on a similar mechanism, but it's not specific to any receptor, meaning the big, beautiful part of this is HIV, the reason it's such a prickly disease is because it mutates so quickly. And so you can't target one part of the virus because it's just going to mutate, and then you've wasted 10 years. And it's no longer like it'll function for a little bit, but then it mutates and it's just done. So this is a beautiful way to target the mechanism by which the virus enters a cell, not at a very specific level, but at a global level on how that interaction happens between capsid and cell. That makes sense. I think it's really beautiful.